Well, the Giants hired an offensive coordinator, and it was not someone anyone was expecting. I think I could say that. What's up, everyone? Bryce Gelman here. The breaking news this morning that came out was, again, not something that at least I was expecting. It's Matt Nagy is the new offensive coordinator for the New York Giants, a guy who wasn't even rumored to get an interview with John Harbaugh. This came completely out of left field. Again, I just okay. Does it really move the needle for me? No, it doesn't. Matt Nagy, Matt Nagy, and let me just acknowledge this. Let me preface this with what I'm about to say here. And I trust John Harbaugh to get it right. I do. You've got to trust him. The Giants have not had a real adult in the room, and he's making the decisions. And those decisions might be right, they might be wrong, but they're informed enough for us to be able to come to the conclusion that it may work out. This isn't like, I don't know, like this isn't a Joe Judge. This isn't a Shermer making an offensive coordinator hire where you got to take everything with a grain of salt and, have this pessimistic outlook to it. I think we have some rose colored glasses on right now with John Harbaugh as the Giants head coach. So I'm going to get into that. I want to discuss, who he is, why this hire was made. And then if you see the title, I want to talk about Guerschon Yabusele and the rumor that he may go to Israel. I want to touch on that. Obviously, the main focus here is going to be Matt Nagy, but yeah, I was not expecting to wake up and read that. That's insane. But we'll get into that in a little. But let's start here. Let's start with Matt Nagy, the former offensive coordinator for the Chiefs for 3 years. I believe 4 years, maybe. I think 22 to 2025 was the Chiefs OC this last year. And, he was head coach of the Bears for a few years. He led them to the playoffs. He was the head coach during the double doink game, the famous gif of him reacting to the double doink. That's him. That's Matt Nagy. And he's someone who developed Mitchell Trubisky into a playoff quarterback. Of course, his career fizzled out after that point and is now a backup, but he made the playoffs with Mitchell Trubisky, and I think he deserves some credit for that. This hire, for a lot of people, was shocking. For me, it was shocking as well, considering the fact that Matt Nagy was never rumored to be interviewed by the Giants. It came completely out of nowhere. If you had told me a couple of weeks ago the Giants would hire a former head coach as their new offensive coordinator, I tell you it was Cliff Kingsbury. He's one of the guys that was rumored. We know that John Harbaugh interviewed him over Zoom. Matt Nagy, though? Matt Nagy. Again, former Chiefs offensive coordinator, won a couple Super Bowls there. The offense in Kansas City was middle of the pack. Andy Reid called the plays. That's like the most concerning thing, I think, for me. There's no guarantee that a guy, and let me say this. Anyone learning under Andy Reid, who arguably is the best offensive mind of the last 30 years, is someone who has the potential to implement what he had, Andy Reid, in Kansas City onto another team. On the flip side, you could look to Eric Bieniemy, someone who was Chiefs offensive coordinator, was hired in a similar role with the Commanders. He got a little promotion, a little bump up as assistant head coach. He goes to the Commanders, actually has the ability to call plays, and he gets canned after 1 year. I'm not saying that Matt Nagy is Eric Bieniemy because Bieniemy didn't have head coaching experience before he was hired as the Chiefs offensive coordinator. Matt Nagy had the experience. He was Chiefs offensive coordinator before they hired Bieniemy, before he took the job with the Bears. And in 2017, that year with Alex Smith, before they went to Patrick Mahomes the next year, they had a top 5 offense in the NFL. And of course, they had the weapons. They had Tyreek Hill. They had Travis Kelce. But either way, Alex Smith, who was a competent quarterback, but he was no Patrick Mahomes. He was no world beater. Matt Nagy deserves credit for where he has been in the past in the NFL. He's a well-traveled head coach, former head coach, now offensive coordinator. It wasn't a complete disaster in Chicago. Again, he made the playoffs. He called the plays there. They got screwed by the double doink. Who knows how far they could have went? But I was not expecting this. And I don't think many other Giants fans were expecting it as well. But when you look at John Harbaugh and you look at former offensive coordinator hires that he's made in the past, Jim Caldwell, Mark Trestman, the list goes on and on, Gary Kubiak. These are all former head coaches that John Harbaugh hired during his time as Ravens head coach. Another coach, Todd Monken. He was never a head coach in the NFL, but excuse me, a head coach in college. So this shouldn't come as a surprise. This is not shocking whatsoever. But again, Matt Nagy. Let's get into, what he could provide, the system he'll implement with the Giants, and what this hiring means. I want to start with the latter first, actually. I think the hiring means that John Harbaugh is looking for someone who could put a system in place that sets the groundwork, that lays the foundation for Jackson Dart, for this offense to excel long term. There's no guarantee that Matt Nagy is going to be here long term. Todd Monken might get fired after 2 years in Cleveland, and John Harbaugh might bring him back in. There's no guarantees around the NFL. What this on paper looks like, it was made for stability. It was made for Jackson Dart to have an offense specifically catered for him, implemented into the system. A West Coast offense. Who has been the one quarterback they've compared Jackson Dart to the most? It's Patrick Mahomes. Well, the Giants just hired Patrick Mahomes, offensive coordinator, for 3-4 years. So if there's one major positive in all of this, it's that. And it's the fact that Matt Nagy learned over a significant period of time from one of the greatest offensive minds in NFL history, in Andy Reid. The major knock on him is he didn't call the plays. He wasn't the play caller behind the 2-time Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs when Matt Nagy was there. That's the biggest knock on him. There wasn't a massive lack of success. It wasn't a disaster in Chicago. It wasn't. He was fired after a 6-11 season. And Chicago, in the past, is that the worst thing in the world? It's a very similar situation to Kevin Stefanski. A head coach comes in, wins Coach of the Year, leads said team to the playoffs, a team in an organization that has had consistent bouts of incompetence, has 2 or 3 consecutive down years, personnel isn't amazing, and they get canned as the scapegoat for the team. And that's what happened in Chicago with Matt Nagy. So at first, again, I think I echoed the sentiments of a lot of Giants fans and being like, oh, Matt Nagy? Really? I was looking forward to a sexy, out-of-the-box hire from John Harbaugh. And I mentioned this on my last live stream where I hypothesized who the next Giants offensive coordinator could be. And I said, I'm intrigued by the idea of hiring an unproven guy, a guy with a chip on his shoulder, a guy who's looking to advance further up the coaching tree in the NFL. Not someone who's been a head coach in the past, not someone who's been fired by a team as head coach in the past. I want someone who is young and unproven. I looked at Charlie Weiss Jr. I looked at Davis Webb. I'll tell you who I didn't focus on, and that's Matt Nagy. I said a very similar thing with the Knicks this past offseason. I said, I really want them to hire someone who wasn't fired as head coach from another team. I didn't want Mike Brown. I didn't want that type of head coach. And the Knicks hired him. And listen, this is not the time to bring this up and say it's been a disaster. The Knicks are on their best stretch of the season. I just thought a younger, proven assistant coach could come in as head coach and completely change the vibes. A la Mark Dagnall, Joe Mazzulla, Ime Udoka. The list goes on and on. The Giants made a very similar move to what the Knicks did with Mike Brown. Albeit not their head coach, one of their assistant coaches, their offensive coordinator, which is probably the most important hire for the Giants. When you got a young quarterback in Jackson Dart, who's up and coming, you're trying to develop him, put him into the right offensive scheme, have an experienced, established play call. The Giants got someone who's experienced. Is he an established play call? I don't think you could say that. After all these years of being the Chiefs' offensive coordinator, where he did not call the plays. The one area to be intrigued by is he's going to implement a system that has been very beneficial and complementary to Patrick Mahomes. A West Coast offense. Prioritizing quick reads. Having tight ends and running backs more involved in the passing game, which I think could be huge for a guy like Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scatterbo. Implementing slants, throws to the flat, pre-snap motion. How important is pre-snap motion? Look at all the greatest teams in the NFL offensively. In the year 2026, they have pre-snap motion. Ben Johnson with the Bears, who is arguably a top 3 offensive mind in the NFL. What did his teams possess with the Lions, with the Bears this year? It's a lot of pre-snap motion. And that's something that Andy Reid has implemented over the years and has seen a lot of great success with the Chiefs. The play calling is the biggest factor here. Does he have it? Implementing the correct offensive scheme. Putting Jackson Dart in the best possible situation to win is paramount. But having the right play caller to help speed up that development might be equally as important. Well, Z, what's up, man? He says this is such a meh hire. I don't hate it, but I'm not excited. Exactly. This is exactly where I'm at. I think the majority of Giants fans are also here at this point. He also says they need to get Isaiah Likely if they're going to feature tight ends more because Theo is a stiff. I'm not going to go out there and say that. I'm not going to put that label. Theo Johnson is a stiff at this point. Yes, he had consistent drop issues throughout his rookie season, throughout the first few weeks of last season. But did he look better by the end of the season? Yes. He showed some improvement. And again, I think it's very difficult to judge a man, to judge a player on an incompetent team. And that argument is more true when it comes to the defensive side of the ball because of how incompetent Shane Bowen was as the defensive coordinator. Mike Kafka wasn't some world-beating offensive coordinator. I think he ruined his chances to get another offensive coordinator spot God forbid, a head coaching spot with how bad the Giants looked after he took over after the Bears game. So Mike Kafka. Don't have to worry about pronouncing that anymore. That's who was the offensive coordinator. And I'm not saying that he contributed to Theo Johnson not being able to catch the ball and having stones for hands. But I'm not going to sit here and say he's a stiff. Theo Johnson has potential. Would I love Isaiah Likely? Absolutely. To be able to utilize those two in 2 tight end sets and 12 personnel? Absolutely. Because Likely isn't just a pass-catching tight end. He's a good blocker as well. He is. I do love Daniel Bellinger, too. I think he's extremely underrated. As your backup tight end? Absolutely. I love him. Theo Johnson obviously has the higher ceiling. He does. If he's able to figure out this drop issue, he'll be a top 10, top 15 tight end in the league. I don't think his ceiling is any higher, though. I don't. He's not going to turn into some top 5, top 8 tight end in the NFL. I do think Isaiah Likely has that potential. I do. Yeah, I mean, this is the comp here. That's what a lot of people have been saying. I think Evan Ingram is more, smaller guy, a lot quicker, much more like a wide receiver than Theo Johnson. Theo Johnson's a bigger body, and his route running ability, I wouldn't say is better, but I think it's comparable. I do. What's up, Jiff? Andrew Jiffis. What's up, man? How's everything? How you feeling about this hire? How you feeling about it? I'm gonna keep circling back to this because I think it's like the best possible comparison here. But Eric Bieniemy, in a very similar situation, left the Chiefs as offensive coordinator for a lateral move. Went to the Commanders. Was canned after 1 year after calling the plays. Goes to UCLA. Is the head coach there. He's canned as well. And now he's back with the Chiefs as offensive coordinator. Just goes to show you that it doesn't take an amazing offensive mind to be offensive coordinator with the Chiefs. Matt Nagy, I give him credit. He was a head coach for 4. He won Coach of the Year. He led the Bears to a playoff performance, to a playoff experience. The double doink ended their season. If that ball was a few inches to the right, who knows how far the Bears would have went. I digress. So he deserves our respect in that regard. And here's Jeff. He says a lot of good options available. Feel like this is the prevailing sentiment from every Giants fan that I've spoken to. Only thing makes me feel good is Harbaugh isn't afraid to fire coordinators, and I can't see Monk. That's what I would say. Like Monken, realistically, the over/under is set at 1.5 years in Cleveland. I think it'll be over. I think he'll last 2 years, and then it'll get canned because that's what they do. Incompetent organizations will consistently scapegoat the head coach, even if the GM was the one who made idiotic draft decisions. And it's not always the case. Sometimes the GM and the head coach are canned at the same time, but more often than not, it's the head coach first, then the GM. It is. The Giants could very well end up with Todd Monken in 2 years. 100%. I wanted to bring something I think was very interesting. I think it was Connor Rogers, I believe. Connor Hughes, I don't know which of the Connors it was. Giants reporter said, and this was well known. The Giants had interest in Charlie Weiss Jr., the offensive coordinator for Ole Miss, left to follow Lane Kiffin to LSU, was the offensive coordinator for Jackson Dart. Young guy. I believe he's 32 years old. The Giants had interest in hiring him. And I don't know if this is true. It's been put out there. I think it's one of the most absurd things that I've ever read. Charlie Weiss Jr. had some interest from the Giants. They reached out, and he said to John Harbaugh, you know what? I'm going to stay with Lane Kiffin. I'm going to stay in college where I don't coach the play, where I don't call the plays, and I'm in college. The guy supposedly had the opportunity to come to the NFL in his early 30s to be John Harbaugh's offensive coordinator, to be the offensive coordinator for Jackson Dart and Malik Neighbors and Cam Scadaboo, and he turned that down? I need to see more on that, but I could not get past that. I know we're talking about Matt Nagy being the new offensive coordinator for the New York Giants, but Weiss Jr. turning down the role to stay in college football with Lane Kiffin at LSU? What an idiot. What a dumbass. That would have been one of my top options. It was one of my top options. Being a younger guy, having that rapport with Jackson Dart. The only concern is, if the Giants have a top 5, top 10 offense, he's gone. He'll get a head coaching job. I think it's just hilarious that he didn't want the opportunity to come to the NFL to be the offensive coordinator under John Harbaugh and essentially put himself on a fast track to be an NFL head coach. Unless it went disastrous. Maybe he feels like he's not ready for the NFL yet. I don't know. A lot of people I know lied on their resumes. Weren't even remotely prepared for the jobs they got. They got the job and they adapted pretty quickly and became pretty good at their job. Maybe he feels like he's not ready to call the plays. Maybe he feels like he needs that opportunity at the college level before he comes to the NFL. Charlie Weiss Jr. made one of the worst decisions, I think, in coaching history. But Matt Nagy is here. This is not a. I think a lot of us were short-sighted, and I think blinded by the idea of there being a sexy hire from John Harbaugh as the offensive coordinator. I think a lot of us were refraining from diving deep into who he's hired in the past. It's a bunch of former head coaches. Gary Kubiak, Jim Caldwell, Mark Trestman. The list goes on and on and on. Todd Monken as well, who's a head coach in college football. This is a very John Harbaugh hire. It is a very meh hire as well. I think what the Giants and John Harbaugh are looking for in the early stages of Jackson Dart's career is putting him in a system that will benefit him the most and where he'll be the most comfortable. And I mentioned this before, and if you're just joining now, I'm Bryce Gelman, talking about Matt Nagy being hired. But I said this earlier, who has Jackson Dart been compared to the most in the NFL out of all the quarterbacks in the NFL? Patrick Mahomes. So naturally, it'd be a smart move to hire his offensive coordinator, right? But the flip side of that argument, the flip side of that positive, is he didn't call the plays for Patrick Mahomes. He never did. It's always Andy Reid. But in terms of implementing a system that could work for this team, could work for Jackson Dart, there's no better system to implement than one learned from Andy Reid. There is none. Could that be what Harbaugh was focusing in on the most? Did he have a set plan in mind for the offensive scheme that he wants to implement for Jackson Dart? These are all things that, at this point in our Giants fandoms, we need to trust John Harbaugh on. I know it's very difficult. The first thought that pops into your mind when the Giants do anything and they make this big of a hire is these idiots, they have no idea what they're doing. We're in a honeymoon period here with John Harbaugh. We are. And this is the most excited 99% of Giants fans have been in a very long time. Continuity is essential. It is. But it's not the be-all, end-all. John Harbaugh is not going to stick with Matt Nagy if he feels the play calling is inadequate. And I'm more or less referring to the continuity being the offensive system, no matter who it is. I think if Matt Nagy is fired, you think the Giants are going to turn around and switch up everything? I know I'm getting way ahead of myself. But if they hire another offensive coordinator, maybe he wants to implement his own scheme. Who knows? But this is clearly what John Harbaugh thinks is best for Jackson Dart. And you got to trust him on that. Now, whether Matt Nagy comes through in that role, whether he's the right head coach for Jackson Dart, that remains to be seen. But we have to trust John Harbaugh's instincts here. That's the most important part of this. He knows ball. He does. A lot of Giants fans out there, I include myself. I mean, John Harbaugh knows more about football on his pinky than I do my entire body. That's kind of like it reigns true for every person that I know, even my podcast co-host, Sean Morash, who thinks he knows everything about football, but he doesn't. We're all talking heads. Doesn't mean we're not right. Doesn't mean we haven't been right in the past. Sometimes organizations have such blinders on to where they can't see the obvious. Just look at the Jets. Aaron Glenn is a great football mind. Muji's a great football mind. Sometimes organizations just don't make the right moves. Sometimes organizations are hampered by idiotic owners. The Giants made a hire. We're going to sit here. We don't need to be overly excited about it. This is no like Greg Roman. I didn't love Cliff Kingsbury. I think it was telling that he got fired after only, 2 years with the Commanders by Dan Quinn. I wanted a younger, unproven guy, a la Davis Webb, a la Charlie Weiss Jr. John Harbaugh does not subscribe to the same belief that I and many other Giants fans subscribe to. He values experience. He values guys who have been there and done that. And he's not going out hiring wildly unsuccessful former head coaches. You know, his former hires, and I mentioned them before. I've mentioned them a few times. Jim Caldwell and Gary Kubiak being two of them. Like, they weren't terrible head coaches. Like, you ask any Lions fan, like, Jim Caldwell's not the one they hate. They probably hate Matt Patricia more. Bunch of other guys there. Harbaugh was successful as he was over the years for a reason. He didn't call the plays. He was a special teams coordinator that was elevated to head coach. Now, would that ever happen in today's NFL? I don't think so. Like, at some point, you need to become a defensive or offensive coordinator, unless you're someone that every single team is looking to hire as an offensive or defensive coordinator. And to get said person to call plays on either side, you got to hire him as head coach. Very difficult for someone to go from being anything under a offensive or defensive coordinator to become a head coach. John Harbaugh was a special teams coordinator. John Harbaugh brings what the Giants have needed for a very long time, which is maturity. And I think that Harbaugh is trying to extend that past the head coaching position. Matt Nagy's a guy that demands respect. He can come into the room. He's got the accolades. He's got that Coach of the Year trophy sitting in his man cave. yes, has his name kind of, I don't know, been dragged through the mud? Has his reputation been knocked down a peg? Maybe. But I think we'd be doing a disservice as Giants fans to look past his prior successes. And when I woke up, I don't think I could have said any of this, but I spent like 2 hours after I saw the news just doing research, reading more into Matt Nagy, understanding the type of offensive scheme that he's going to implement for Jackson Dart. So as I said, it's paramount to the Giants' success. There's nothing more important, nothing, for the Giants than developing Jackson Dart. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that quarterbacks are the most important position in the NFL. They might be the most important position across any of the four major sports. And it is essential that you get said quarterback right. And the Giants did. Knock on wood. Hopefully we don't see a sophomore slump from Jackson Dart like we saw with CJ Stroud. The Giants and John Harbaugh deserve to be trusted. They do. So that's where I'm at on this. I like the idea of the West Coast offense being implemented here. A type of scheme that allows for the mobility of the quarterback, which Jackson Dart has been so adept at. But Patrick Mahomes is a mobile quarterback. I think up until the middle of the season, the only effective running game that the Chiefs had was Patrick Mahomes with his own two legs. So that was effective then. Now, will it be effective here? Will Matt Nagy be able to hammer it home to Jackson Dart's head, no pun intended, to get down and avoid hits to his head? These are all valid, essential questions to ask. And stuff that obviously all of us are going to be watching out for. Just sucks. It's February. Like we have to wait another 6.5 months, 6 months to get to the preseason. It flies by every year. We'll be there before you know it. I'll be losing my Dynasty League in the finals for the 4th straight year before I know it. As you can tell, I'm not over that. And I don't think I ever will be. All right, let's get into Guerschon Yabusele, who might be leaving the NBA for Israel. Guerschon Yabusele has been terrible this year. He has. I have been one of many Knicks fans who has been extremely disappointed in his play this year. Out of both moves they made, out of all the moves they made, because they signed Brogdon, they signed Landry Shamet, get into that a little bit later. They signed Jordan Clarkson. Out of all the moves that the Knicks made, Yabusele was the one I was the most excited about. His efficiency on the offensive side of the ball for the 76ers was amazing. It was. Shooting 40% from three, 50+% from the field. Didn't look like an absolute snail on the basketball court. Yabusele's been terrible. He has. Let's call a spade a spade. It's been really, really bad. And this could be, I looked into this and I still don't fully understand the cap implications of this. I know that it could be good if he leaves. The Knicks might have to attach a second or two to trade him to another team so that team could buy him out. A team that's under the first apron. But I think if the Knicks buy out Yabusele, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to make any moves, marginal or not. So Why am I even talking about this, Bryce? Why are you even discussing this? I don't know. I don't know. I just think it's insane. It's one of the craziest headlines that I've read this year. And not something that I'm upset at whatsoever. He's been terrible. Awful. Has not been able to find his stroke from 3-point range consistently whatsoever. Has not been good defensively whatsoever. Has zero post game. Has zero mid-range game whatsoever. And you could tell Mike Brown is trying as hard as he can to get him going. Because he and the Knicks brass knew what they were getting when they signed him to the mid-level exception. They saw the upside. They saw the potential. And he has been massively underwhelming. And I don't think he gets enough. I'm not going to say that you need to hate the guy. He seems like a good enough person. I'm not saying personally. I don't think he gets enough hate and disrespect for his level of play on the court. It's a bitch move at this point to say, you know what, my NBA career might be done. I'm going to go to Israel. I was just overseas for a bunch of years in Europe. I had an amazing 2024 Olympics where I dunked on LeBron. I have an amazing season with the 76ers. Then I signed with the championship contender in the Knicks, and I've done jack shit. Nothing. Has not contributed whatsoever to the Knicks. And I guess, PER might be the correct stat to compare this to. But if I had to use an analogy for how bad Guerschon Yabusele is and has been, in baseball, he'd have a negative WAR. Wouldn't he be 0? He'd have like a -1 WAR, which is terrible. And not even Anthony Volpe's that bad. So I still don't understand the cap implications of this news of him leaving the Knicks. Something to monitor, something to keep an eye on. When I find out more, I can give a more informed take. Like I just saw this news about trying to see. Yeah, a couple hours ago this came out. Has been the biggest news around the NBA. As you can understand, the James Harden stuff is what the fuck happened there. Overnight, the Clippers playing their best basketball they played in 2 or 3 years. Harden's been really good. Kawhi's been really good. They've got all those old depth pieces. Now, all of a sudden, they're looking to trade James Harden to the Cavs, which I like for the Cavs. I do. But they're trading long-term potential for short-term title chase. More information needs to come out about this. What happened with James Harden? Why is this happening? I'm interested to see about that. So yeah, Yabusele has been nowhere near the top of the list of stories that people are paying attention to in the NBA. But I'm glad I was able to speak on that. I was glad that I got 35 minutes in about Matt Nagy is the new offensive coordinator for the Giants. And I'm going to be able to get some more thoughts out tonight on One Giant Step with Sean Morash. I'd love to hear what he has to say on this. He already called me an idiot this morning. So I think that should be that should make for a fun conversation between the two of us. So check that out wherever you get your podcast. I'll be tweeting that out. He'll be tweeting it out as well. So stay tuned for that. That should be a fun one, out either tonight or tomorrow morning. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. Matt Nagy is the Giants offensive coordinator. All right. Okay. Talk to you all soon. Peace.